Start with you, Councilman Dickens.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Bill, for all of your work in pulling this together, and all of the organizations, Enterprise, HouseATL, et cetera, all of you for the Transformation Alliance for bringing us all together. My name is Andre Dickens, and I want to be the next mayor of the city of Atlanta. I think this election is about the future and the soul of the city of Atlanta. Who are we? Are we going to move forward in peace, productivity, and prosperity, or are we going to go backwards into displacement, destruction, and corruption? Are we going to move this city forward to overcome the tale of two cities that we know about? A city that has a tremendous amount of prosperity, but also multi-generations of poverty. I want to make sure that we bridge that gap, as I've done in my adult life when it comes to formulating strategies and projects and programs and policies for equity. And this is a very important time as we talk about affordable housing and housing in the city of Atlanta right now. I've been a vocal and legislative leader on city council as it relates to affordable housing for all of my 8 years. I've been the most vocal in City Hall about affordable housing. I have strategies and plans and demonstrated capacity to lead in this area. I've demonstrated it through my accomplishments and all of the policies that I've produced and the programs. I'm anxious to move forward in a new direction that is so focused on equity and opportunities for all of Atlantans to be able to live in the city of Atlanta that they have long desired to live in, but now are being displaced. And so I want to make sure that we have a pathway for seniors to continue to live in the city of Atlanta, for those that are having new amenities come around them to be able to stay in Atlanta. So as you know, from inclusionary zoning to senior rehab housing developments to fighting development authorities that did not put affordable housing in their incentive packages. I've done all that and created more. I'm Andre Dickens.
Thank you, Councilman. Ms. Gay, you're next.
Good morning, and thanks to all our hosts for convening us. I've participated in the Regional Housing Forum for years, and we were in person at my church, St. Luke's, for a long time, and I hope we get back there soon. But appreciate what all you've done to keep it going virtually. I am running for mayor because of this issue. I have been concerned about the extreme income inequality and lack of income mobility in our city, and the fact that we've actually are getting worse, not better. In 2010, we had 41 distressed neighborhoods according to the city's own records. Today, we have 45. We are simply not doing enough to address the needs we have in our most distressed neighborhoods and make sure that all of our children have the opportunity to grow up in a healthy, safe neighborhood and with a chance at success. I have been involved in the affordable housing field for probably 25 years. I had a privilege to serve in the mayor's office when we began the revitalization of public housing, and worked with the Atlanta Housing Authority for years when they were actually building mixed income, mixed use communities, helped them make those projects happen. I served on the board and chaired the board of Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, where we advocated for and developed policies for promoting affordable and mixed income housing. I co-chair the Urban Land Institute Task Force on Affordable Housing, which put forth the report that became the framework for HouseATL. And I have continued to work in my role as the chair of the Livable Communities Council at ULI on those policies. I've also actually been involved in producing thousands of units of affordable housing, helping nonprofit and for-profit developers and housing authorities use economic incentives, figure out zoning, figure out permitting what's needed to develop thousands of units of affordable housing. I helped develop the policy for the first of the tax allocation districts that required affordable housing at Atlantic Station. And I would like to continue to use that knowledge and those skills to help our entire city.
Thank you, Ms. Gay. Council President Moore.
Good morning. Again, thank you to our sponsors for bringing this very important subject before us. You know, housing is one of the 5 essentials for survival. And you also mentioned security, which is one of those as well. And they are interdependent upon each other and go hand in hand. In Atlanta, we have a desperate need for housing on all spectrums, starting with our unsheltered population, also talking about those who are income challenged, as well as our workforce. Our City of Atlanta employees, for example, can't afford to live in the City of Atlanta. Then even those who have jobs, that are middle to lower middle income, are challenged by the market and what is going on. As a member of council, I have been one who has championed affordable housing, making sure that those developments that took place in my district had a component of affordable housing. Making sure, for instance, when the Atlanta Housing Authority revitalized Perry Homes into West Highlands, that we had affordable housing on a spectrum, single-family homes, apartments for rent, making sure that we had a component where we could house our elderly, they could live in comfortable surroundings. And I've also made sure that, for instance, when we're discussing the Beltline, that we made an amendment to make sure that we had an affordable housing trust fund. I'm also have sponsored legislation to make sure that we are making sure that we are looking at all of our needs. There is a spectrum of needs in the city of Atlanta, and housing is at the forefront. Housing is a right, and we need to have safe, clean, affordable housing for all residents on all spectrums.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Mr. Reed, welcome.
Nice to see you, Bill. We sit in the Westside Future Fund's office today. This was an initiative of my administration because we were able to focus on helping people stay in their homes and offset the rising burden of property taxes in Atlanta. Under my administration's leadership, we expanded the number of people who live in the Atlanta Housing Authority and receive support by 25%. We also won a $30 million Choice Neighborhood Grant from President Obama's administration. Where we're going in the future is we're going to take the city of Atlanta's real estate that we own in fee simple, some 877 acres, and we're going to apply our will to it. And we're going to build vertical housing faster by providing not-for-profit developers and for-profit developers the real estate that we have already zoned so that we can build housing faster. Folks need to remember that in 2010, we were coming out of the Great Recession, massive foreclosures, and then we made the city so successful that people started to come into Atlanta to the tune of 71,400 people. Now it requires the will to make sure that folks who have been here the entire time are not forced out. You can fit Manhattan, Boston, and San Francisco inside of the Atlanta city limits. So there literally is no excuse for us not to build the housing we need at 60% median income. And finally, my administration was able to run the government in a manner where we left $200 million in cash reserves. So the folks who are going to be best able to implement public housing are the folks who have demonstrated the capacity to get the resources to pay for it and build something very, very special.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Councilman Brown.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having us here with you today, and to your entire team for putting this together. We're appreciative. My name is Antonio Brown, and like many Atlantans, I grew up in poverty with my parents in and out of prison, in conditions that were not sustainable, that remind me of the very communities in which I represent now as an Atlanta City Councilman. I was able to pull myself up by my bootstraps and overcome the adversity that I faced. And I launched a small business right here in the heart of Atlanta into Bloomingdale's and Nordstroms nationwide. Through my love and passion for community, I've been able to serve on the Atlanta City Council, where I've passed over 60 pieces of legislation, some of which is to address some of the most complex issues we've faced in this city with regards to housing. I co-sponsored the $100 million Housing Opportunity Bond. I put forth legislation for an affordable housing permit fee waiver program. And in addition to that, I also disallowed the congregation of poverty and low-income communities through the discrimination of Section 8 vouchers. This is why I'm running to be the next 61st mayor of Atlanta. We must create a socio-economic shift in the economic class system in Atlanta. If we do not move residents out of poverty into our working middle class and help lift up our working middle class, we will not recognize Atlanta. Atlanta will not become this great international city we speak so greatly about. We have to create an inclusive and thriving ecosystem where no Atlantan is ever left behind again. Thank you again, Bill, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Brown. Now we're going to get to a series of questions. I'll just ask them and we'll go down the line. Question 1, investments in the city's infrastructure has historically contributed to wide gaps in opportunity, wealth, and health, leading to displacement of legacy residents. The question, outline your plan to prevent displacement of legacy residents and their families while ensuring investments in the communities benefit them as well as new residents. We'll start with you, Ms. Gay.
Eventually I'll get this right. This question reminds me of the line in the book, The Sun Also Rises. The question, how did you go bankrupt? Answer, 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. That's what's happened to us. We knew this was coming. When the Beltline TAD was created, we knew that that substantial investment, public investment in new infrastructure would make the properties around it more attractive. There was an idea that we needed an affordable housing strategy, but it wasn't effectively implemented. So we're behind. We have that same opportunity now with the new West Side Park. The neighbors who live near that park have been screaming for help. We've got to be intentional when we make public investments in new public infrastructure, make areas more attractive. We need to have a strategy for making sure that that area remains accessible to all residents. Some of that is building more housing, just making sure we build more housing at all different price points, particularly using targeted use of incentives and public land and public resources to make sure that some of that new housing is affordable. And then with regard to legacy residents, particularly our older citizens who may be on fixed incomes, we need to be thoughtful about strategies to help them, protect them from rapid increase in property taxes. The issue isn't so much price increase, it's rapid increase. There isn't, a test that's being done here in the West Side Future Fund with creating a fund to defray some of that increased property tax cost. I would be in favor of expanding, looking at how that's working and expanding that or something similar in other areas where there's rapid public investment.
Moore?
So yes, there are many things that I would like to see us do on anti-displacement. First and foremost, we need to do a citywide study that will consider what the neighborhood standards are so we can rank them from A to F. There are many of our areas that are still affordable, and we need to know what infrastructure, what other needs they have to help stabilize those communities. Also helping the residents there, particularly the seniors and others, make sure that they can rehab their home and keep them in place. We also need to look at the property taxes, either finding a legacy resident assessed value cap or an increased exemption for those who have lived in their homes 10, 15 years or more. That also would have to work along with, of course, our school board as well as our county for them to really see that impact. We also need to make sure we're educating our citizens about predatory speculators in our community so that they're not selling their properties for pennies on the dollar and not following to a lot of this unscrupulous investing that's going on. I know I get calls every single day almost about properties, my home, wanting to buy it, and I know that a lot of people are receiving that information as well, and we need to have someone at City Hall who can assist them and direct them as needed to make sure that they're making the right choices with their property. So I want to make sure that we also look at the anti-displacement fund that is already in place in the city and see how we can make that citywide where others can help invest in helping people who are finding themselves on the edge if they have to lose their property. We want our legacy residents to stay because they are the lifeblood of our city.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Mr. Reed?
I don't think that there is anything that is more efficient than building new housing aggressively. And so after the mortgage foreclosure crisis, We had to recover from that. And now we're experiencing prosperity that came after a great deal of work to turn around an economy that was in the worst shape it was in. And so now we have this prosperity. I believe that the way to build affordable vertical construction, and I define affordable as 60% of median, not 80% of median, is to provide the land to excellent for-profit and not-for-profit developers with a firm commitment on price points around rent and around purchase. The other step we need to take regarding income inequality and the gaping income inequality that we're seeing, not just in Atlanta, but across the United States, is to have a scattered site approach to allow people who are currently in public housing of some form to acquire the asset and build wealth. If you are in an apartment or a home that is subsidized by either AHA or the city, I believe that at a certain time, be it 10, 12, or 15 years, you need to be able to convert your rental payments into acquisition of the asset so that you can build generational wealth that you're able to transition to your family members. We also need to do what we're doing at the West Side Future Fund in a bigger and more structured way. We need to raise more public money, more private dollars that are tied to the extraordinary success that we've had in the construction sector, going from 400 million in building permits to 5 billion, and we need to utilize the revenue that comes from some of that success to offset the property tax payments of people who've been in Atlanta the whole time. Got to do it right away.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Councilman Brown.
Thank you. I think it's important that we first frame this conversation around renters and owners, because when we begin to talk about displacement in the city of Atlanta, I represent many of the communities that have legacy residents that are being displaced, but many of them are renters. They don't own their homes. So a citywide anti-tax displacement fund or program is great for our homeowners in the city of Atlanta, but it doesn't work for our renters. And we've got to create an opportunity with the state to help support rent control so we can begin to really focus on those renters in our communities that are potentially going to be displaced because of the rising tax values in their communities, in which homeowners are now passing down to the renters. I believe that the work that the West Side Future Fund around the city, the anti-tax displacement fund, has been great. I'm appreciative that the mayor has created a fund and expanded it around the entire city. But I believe we have to do more work around supporting and creating an inclusive environment for all of our residents. You know, I authored the legislation, the resolution to the governor to call for local municipalities being able to control rents within the city of Atlanta that could help prevent displacement for those in low-income communities that are facing this gentrification that is occurring right now in everyday communities in Atlanta. I also believe through the $100 million housing opportunity bond, there is opportunity there for us to be able to leverage those funds to help ensure that we have proper programs in place to prevent displacement amongst our legacy residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councilman Dickens.
Yeah, part of the answer to your question is the new thing is doing the old thing fully. Just do what we said we would do. This is a drumbeat that I've had for 8 years. And so the result of that is all of the fantastic recommendations that HouseATL came up with. The new thing is just fully do the old thing. There are a whole list of great ideas and functional, doable items as it relates to development without displacement, to keep people in place, to allow folks to be able to have an opportunity to continue to live in Atlanta. For us, it's about the will. What is your focal point? We put a lot of things in place because I kept beating a drum since 2013 that working folks can't afford to live in the city of Atlanta. Housing costs have increased by 50%, but their incomes have only increased by 10%. So that means that at some point, lots of people begin to be cost burdened. We have all of the recommendations, from stopping predatory lending by, stop predatory advancement against seniors, to be able to freeze seniors' taxes, to have long-term affordability, to have an anti-displacement fund, which we have, that we have to fund more, to be able to use reserves to improve that anti-displacement fund. We have to hire a chief housing officer that is committed to anti-displacement while also knowing how to build. We have to build at Bankhead, Bourne Homes, all these AHA properties that have not been built on for 12 years. This is where we get our density. This is where we have our mixed income from 0% AMI all the way up to market rate. I want to see that happen in rapid form and fashion, and we have to follow the recommendations of all the great minds that have put in, and using our nonprofit developers to help us.
Thank you. Who does that person report to in your administration?
Me,
Okay.
the mayor.
Our next question. How do you deal with the housing needs of the most vulnerable? You might see a theme in our questions here. How do you deal with the housing needs of the most vulnerable? The low income, the unhoused, and those facing evictions. Moore, you're up.
Housing is a right, and it is certainly something everyone needs. And our unsheltered population, one that has to be a part of the conversation. And we have to have this conversation with people in the community, because we have to not only say we want to house people, but we have to be willing to allow them to be housed in our community. And so it is a regional approach that we're going to have to take. It's going to have to take multi-jurisdictional involvement from not only the city, because the city cannot do it alone. It's going to take the county with Health and Human Services. It's going to take the state chipping in with mental health services. It's going to take our federal government. And we're going to have to bring all of those resources together and work with our partners to make sure that we provide housing not only for those that are unsheltered, but for those that are lower income. We have let them down because we have property in the Atlanta Housing Authority that we have not developed. And that is where we can allow them to be housed, as well as looking at the fact that they have vouchers, but they cannot go anywhere with them if private homeowners don't allow them to. And so we need to make sure that we're providing those opportunities on the ground, even working with more private sector apartment complexes to make sure that they will allow those who are on the lower income strata have an opportunity to have somewhere to live. But to deal with this issue, we all are going to have to be a part of this and not just pointing out the problem. And that will take, again, a multi-jurisdictional approach, very different levels of our government approach, but also, more importantly, our community. We have to say that we will allow a supportive housing, smaller shelter beds in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Mr. Reed.
I think that if you want to know what someone will do, you look at what they have done. During my administration, we cut homelessness in half, according to the Regional Commission on Homelessness. And I like Jack Hardin's quote, which is, if you can reduce something by 50%, you can eliminate it. During my administration, we were acknowledged by President Obama for functionally ending veterans' homelessness. If you look at 3 people or 4 people who are homeless, probably one of them is a veteran, and if you have a veteran, you can certainly house that veteran effectively, and that frees up resources to help other folks. I also believe that we should acquire 12 to 15 properties that are small to medium in size, no more than 50 people, and have a scattered site, spread, shared approach throughout the city of Atlanta and the region on acquisition. And when we build these facilities, when we acquire them and update them, they should have all of the services related to job training, psychological care, drug rehabilitation efforts, all on the campus. But rather than talking about it, we did it. You go to the Imperial Hotel, which is about 200 yards away from Ms. Gay's law firm. They house 88 folks who are in transitional housing right now. We also launched the largest funding effort, the Housing Opportunity Bond of $25 million that was completed or launched under my administration, was matched by $25 million in private philanthropy. But we have activities right now that should be moving that aren't moving at all. We won a Choice Neighborhoods grant from President Obama's administration for $30 million. I am unaware of any movement on that. We acquired the Civic Center property to place housing in the heart of the city for those most vulnerable. The bottom line is it's time to get going.
You did have a housing officer in your administration. If you have one in the future, who does that person report to?
Always the mayor. My sense is that the housing issue behind crime and violence is the biggest challenge that the city faces, and that person should be interacting with me as a direct report.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Brown.
Yes, thank you for the question. You know, I believe what we face in the city of Atlanta right now is we have an unsheltered population when we speak about our most vulnerable in the city. And then we also have those in the city in which are on the verge of being unsheltered. And where I would like, as mayor, to see Atlanta go is that we become more of a preventative city, where we stop operating from a reactive basis and we focus on proactive ways of addressing these issues. So as mayor, one of the first things I will do is establish a 700 emergency bed system for our unsheltered population with low barriers for entry, because right now we don't have enough housing developed to even matriculate these individuals into any kind of sustainable care. And if you can't move them into sustainable care, then how are they ever going to be able to reacclimate back into society? In addition, I would expand the work of the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation to ensure that they're working with families that are on the verge of being unsheltered. They are a paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent. So ensuring that we have that in place, as well as on my platform, I speak about a beloved village where we can have a community of unsheltered as well as working middle class folks in a modular, developed community. Because in order to build, you have to build fast in order to keep up with the demand in this city, with the crisis that we're facing. The only way to do that is through modular development. And through this beloved community, we will house a third-party service provider like Mercy Care to offer mental health, counseling, dental, health care, all of the services that are necessary, not just to the unsheltered, but to our community at large.
And do you see that run by the city or the city supporting private sector to do that?
You know, the city has to take back accountability. We have been pawning off the needs of the unsheltered population.
So the city would run it?
Absolutely.
All right. Councilman Dickens.
Yeah, we currently have a moral dilemma on our hands where a little over 3,000 individuals are unsheltered in our city. And about a quarter of them actually live on the streets. This is something we have to resolve, and my 8 years on city council, we've seen that go down by 25 to 50% depending on who's counting. But as of late, over the past year and a half, we've seen that number of unsheltered rise, and individuals that don't go into a shelter or transitional housing at all. And so they are living on the streets of Atlanta. And I believe that we should have a housing first model, as has been established in this city. Working with Partners for Home and our continuum of care, it is important that we get people into a stable place of housing for at least 90 days, where we can then triage them. We can triage for mental health issues, for drug addiction, for domestic violence, for whatever has led them into poverty, into homelessness for this temporary period or this extended period. We can then triage them where they are in a stable environment and getting a comfortable place to stay and a meal. This is important where we can bring in the mercy cares and we can bring in the institutions that can help us be able to triage the situation. But first, we have to start with housing first. And I believe that we can have a dozen hotels, motels in the city or just outside of the city where we can do that. We can buy those facilities and enable those people to go there for that temporary period of time and have social workers be able to triage the situation. We passed the $25 million homeless opportunity bond. That is still available to us, and we used it greatly during COVID. We have to utilize the land that's at the Atlanta Housing Authority. As I said, I believe that our new development that we actually will do when I'm mayor at Atlanta Housing Authority, we actually start building housing units, and they will start with the homeless population first. We will start with 0% AMI as our starting point, and then we move people to jobs through Georgia Works.
Thank you. Ms. Gay.
Yes, you asked about both people who don't have homes and then people who may have homes but are extremely low income, and I want to make sure we talk about both of those because they're slightly different things. For people who are at very low income, let's say 20, 30% of area median income, that is the Atlanta Housing Authority's job. That is what they are uniquely equipped and chartered and designed to do. So we absolutely must get AHA back into the business of building housing, building deeply affordable and mixed income housing. The nonprofit sector is doing a little bit of that, but the big gorilla in the room is the Atlanta Housing Authority, and they actually must get back into that business. Because the more we have housing available at that price point, because it's not just 60%, it's not just 80%, it's much lower than that, the better we'll able to keep people from becoming homeless in the first place. But if that is where people are, then we need to also focus on housing for them. Just being sheltered isn't enough. They need a home, because many times they've also got a mental illness or drug or alcohol addiction or other problems for which they need stable housing in order to get the services and the treatment that they need. So I really would focus on moving as fast as we can toward building more supportive and transitional housing, using city land, and perhaps enlisting our faith communities to build on land they own so that we can more quickly build the supply of housing we need. And it doesn't need to be giant buildings. It needs to be smaller, more neighborhood scale, where you can live in a more community-oriented setting and receive the services that we need. We partner with Partners for Home and the infrastructure, United Way, the infrastructure we already have, to make sure that we can provide that housing at the scale we need and provide the services in order to have people succeed in transitioning their lives.
Thank you, Ms. Gay. We're moving on to the third question. I want to compliment you. We're actually on time here, folks, so we'll keep moving. So historically low supply of all housing stock. This past year, we've seen a sharp rise in home prices. We all acknowledge. You've all spoke to production, but I want to put a little sharper point on it. There's a 30% home ownership gap between black and white families, which is a leading contributor to the wealth gap. If you don't own a home, it's hard to build wealth. What would you do to increase affordable housing production and promote home ownership in black households to help close the gap? Mr. Reed?
One, we would definitely move forward with the scattered site housing approach, which allows for the acquisition of new construction. We actually launched this initiative. We did it in Summerhill, a community before, so we know that it works and we know that it changes people's lives. If you're in public or supported housing, you need to have a path towards home ownership. And I believe that the scattered site approach, which has been supported by HUD nationally, is an opportunity. I also think the fact that the United States government is going to be spending more money than it has in the history of the country gives us an opportunity to leverage our federal relationships to go for more significant grants to undergird the kind of housing we need that's affordable. We did that before by going to President Obama's administration and winning the Choice Neighborhood Grant, for example, $30 million that has gone unutilized and undeployed. The most important thing that you can do is take land that is owned by the city of Atlanta today and build new housing stock at discounted prices with people who have been historically locked out in mind. Fact of the matter is we went from crisis to success in Atlanta. We went from the Great Recession in 2010 to a real estate market that ended up with $5 billion in new construction. The same kind of focus that we put into turning that situation around, functionally ending veterans' homelessness, cutting homelessness in half in the city of Atlanta, moving forward with a $25 million homeless opportunity bond matched by another $25 million, is the focus that we need to now work on ending or reducing the income inequality gap in our city.
Thank you, sir. The question is about production and really looking at home ownership for African Americans. Councilman Brown.
Yeah, so I think we need to have a very transparent conversation about one of the greatest contributing factors to the lack of really being able to build affordable housing or just housing of any kind within the city of Atlanta, and that's land cost. Land cost is astronomical, especially I represent the area in which the Mercedes-Benz Stadium came to. It drove up land values and really made it unaffordable to build any kind of housing, even for the city of Atlanta. And I think that that's important, which is why I would like to leverage the 758 acres of vacant city-owned land. I want to conduct an auction, a citywide auction, where we can start leveling the playing fields for black and brown communities that have been left behind and giving them a true opportunity to be able to own land in which they can build housing on. Because if they can't, even if they could afford to pay for housing, the cost that it takes to build it, if you're not building modular in Atlanta right now, it's almost impossible unless the city is incentivizing you. And modular is 1/3 of the cost of traditional construction. It eliminates waste, and it really creates the ability to build mass at very large scales very quickly. So I would focus on those components to really ensure that our black and brown communities are no longer left behind, and they truly have an opportunity at the American dream, something me and my family struggled to have an opportunity for in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councilman Dickens.
Yes, in 8 years, we will build or preserve 20,000 units of affordable housing in my administration. And that includes housing that is, whether that's rental housing or for sale housing. As you mentioned, home ownership is going to be very important. From down payment assistance, which we have put in $140 million worth of housing opportunity bonds that I've been a part of as a co-sponsor, 100 one time and $40 million another time. And each time we do put in their money for down payment assistance. We have to be more aggressive with that, and also with Invest Atlanta. I think, as others have said, it is very important that at the Atlanta Housing Authority property and at MARTA that we actually build. We have not built in 12 years, and it's important that we build housing that is for rent and for sale and for seniors. This is a critical amount of land that we can leverage to be able to have families, because the land cost is already there. It's already free. It's baked in. We can be able to provide low-income housing right there on those sites and go in density. Lots of opportunities there. We have not talked a lot about community land trusts, but the community land trusts are vital. We have to do a lot more community land trust properties. Amanda Ryan has said something like 500 can be done with a small investment, and that's what I'll contribute to, as well as the home bank. Now, we've talked about housing, and of course we need to do the missing middle, where we have duplexes, triplexes, where individuals can own one side of the whole thing and then rent out to others and make income. But we also have to talk about income, because jobs is important for us to be able to have home ownership. That's why programs like my Tech Bridge program that trains people to go from poverty to prosperity, to get a $60,000, $70,000 job in just 4 months. I've trained hundreds of people that are now home owners when they were renters. It is important to have an Atlanta Department of Labor that also works with our housing department, so that then we overcome these challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. Ms. Gay.
It's the racial wealth gap is a critically important issue for our city. In the United States, for most families, a major source of wealth in the family is the equity in their homes. because of centuries of racial discrimination, black families are behind. They haven't had the generations of wealth that white families have been able to build. Also, we still have a fair amount of segregation and racial segregation in housing in our city, and prices and values are going up more rapidly in some parts of the city than there are other parts of town. But there are things we can do about this. We have a lot of vacant housing in this city, but it's in neighborhoods where people don't want to live because we haven't made the investment. So the first thing we need to do is look comprehensively at our more distressed neighborhoods and make sure we catalyze the kind of public investment and bring in community partners till we make sure we make those neighborhoods more attractive. And then those houses will be more attractive, and there'll be more opportunities for people to buy housing and build wealth. There have been some strategies around down payment assistance. When I chaired the Mixed Income Communities Initiative a number of years ago, that's one of the things we looked at as ways to close that wealth gap in buying a house by having down payment assistance. I would look hard at ways to expand that through existing programs and new programs. So it's not just about housing, it's about neighborhoods. It's about how you make neighborhoods healthy so that there are more places for people to build and buy housing, but also create the income stream and the down payment assistance to make it more possible for black families to buy housing in the first place. Some of that is supply, some of that is income.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gay.
Thank you for that question, because the home ownership gap in the black community is a real situation. So how do we fix that gap? You first have to look at some of the impediments. Of course, first and foremost, what do you make? How much money do you make, and are you able to get good paying jobs? And so I certainly have a lot of plans of working to get our Atlanta Workforce Development Agency up and running, working with the unions who have excellent apprentice programs where people can get good paying jobs. But when you get the job, how can you handle the money? And so a lot of us in the black community have issues with credit worthiness. We need to do financial literacy, helping people get their credit together, and working with organizations like NACA, who do an excellent job of helping walk people through the process so that they can get into the home ownership. The second part of your question was about production. How do we produce these units? And we talked about the many opportunities we have from city-owned property to AHA, but we also have a lot of property in our land bank authority. And instead of giving those properties to for-profit organizations, we can work with our nonprofit sector. I would like to see us be able to have a direct link to those properties to home ownership, and then maybe working with a NACA or another organization that can help get them the finances that they would need to either rehab the property or to build on vacant property. So we need to look at not only the fact that people have a hard time getting into properties because of their credit worthiness, getting them able to do that, making sure they have a job that can pay for it, and looking at the property that we have now in the city and making it available to them.
Thank you very much. Our next question really gets to some real sensibilities, and where if you're sitting at the council or you're the mayor, you get a blunt of a lot of different opinions about this. But where I'm going here is around zoning. So the city of Atlanta is growing and attracting good jobs, and many of you spoke to, if you're not making a living wage, you're not likely to be able to afford your housing. However, our housing supply and production lags considerably. Zoning can determine how we develop our community and ultimately who can live where. The question: how do you propose adopting the city's zoning regulations to accommodate these new residents while not fueling further displacement? You're up, Councilman Brown.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most important questions that I've heard asked at a forum. And the reason is because we have to understand that the city needs density. Density is required in order to really build the city's tax base to be able to afford any of the services here we talk about, whether that's housing, mental health, the unsheltered population. it requires a tax base to do that. And right now, the current city's tax base does not support us being able to fund the projects that we need to, so that residents aren't left behind or cannot live in certain neighborhoods. So when we talk about the zoning regulations, yes, we need to support density, but the zoning regulations must be in alignment with the communities and the neighborhoods, because right now, there's a huge controversial issue around the new CDP zoning that's being heard through neighborhoods, where we're saying we want to build density in single-family communities, which is important, but we have to make sure that the density we're building, whether that's duplexes, townhomes, whatever it is, that the community has the ability to weigh in on how they look, how do they fit in their communities, and we need to make sure that they're
I
affordable.
guess the question's, where do you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I support that we need density in the city, but it must be inclusive of the community, and we have to recognize that the neighborhoods should have a say in how that density comes into their community.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Councilman Dickens.
Yeah, we definitely have to get more density. We have to increase density in the city of Atlanta, and that's because the land costs continue to rise, and we have so many people that find our city attractive that continue to move here. So we do have to grow in density. Also, it increases our revenue capacity for the city to be able to pay for all the services and the things that we want to do on behalf of the public. I was the first council member and anyone in the Southeast to pass an inclusionary zoning policy in the whole Southeast. This is a challenging thing to do. It took 2 years to get done, and it is the Beltline inclusionary zoning as well as West Side, the stadium neighborhoods. This is where we incentivize developers and require them to give us affordable housing units in exchange for additional density. So that is what I've already done, which is why I believe that we can do more of that as we grow across the entire city. We have to invest in allowing for the missing middle, duplexes, triplexes, quads. Those are things, flats and bungalows inside of the city already that are in the city, but adding to that so that people can have more folks on an acre of land. And I think that's important, but we have to make sure that we do this in a way that preserves the quality and the character of our communities. What I'd like to see is on all of our AHA properties that we have more density. Around our transit corridors, MARTA stations have to have a whole lot of density. We should be going sky high as much as we can, using nonprofit developers and for-profit developers. Also, on some of our corridors, some of our high-capacity corridors, these roads should have more density. But I also believe that the communities, the single-family residences, these neighborhoods should have the ability to preserve their character by not having us blanket and tell them exactly what to do in our zoning department. So that's why we're doing a zoning rewrite that I recommend.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. Ms. Gay?
Yes, I think we need to be really clear about why we're talking about density. And density is important for several reasons. One, we need more places for people to live. We need more places for the people who live here now and the people who are coming. Even at more modest projections of growth, we need more housing. Secondly, density can support transit. It will make us better able to get federal funding to expand our transit system if we've got density in and around our existing transit corridors and our planned transit corridors. It also can be a tool for affordability, but density in and of itself doesn't assure affordability. My view is the best way to address all of that is in the context of our pending rewrite of the zoning code, because there's a way to plan where density is appropriate, along corridors, along thoroughfares. There are a lot of places that have vacant land, a lot of parts of our city that could handle a lot more density, that have vacant land. I mean, some of the area right where we are today could handle more density. And focus on where density is appropriate, and then use density bonuses that actually work. We've had affordable housing density bonuses in the code for years. I work on these projects all the time. They don't work because they're not correlated with what the actual cost is. So we need to be very intentional about how we use the zoning code to provide actual incentives that actually work to stimulate affordable housing. We're also going to have to tie that zoning into our thoughtful use of the incentives that the city has to make sure that you maximize the use of incentives to actually encourage affordable housing. But we also need to remember that we are a city of neighborhoods, and we are a city where our neighborhoods have a say in the planning of their futures. And this reason for doing this in the context of the rewrite of the zoning code is it would allow extensive neighborhood input, that we can preserve the character of our historic neighborhoods, preserve the uniqueness of our neighborhoods, have the proper type of neighborhood input that we always do in Atlanta, but come up with something that makes us a healthier city.
Thank you, Ms. Gay. Ms. Moore.
Yes, thank you for this question, because it certainly is an issue that's before the city. As early as March, I was asked about this at an MP meeting, and it was printed in the newspaper that I do not support a proposal to disrupt the character of our single-family neighborhood. Then later on, we had proposals that are before the council now for CDP and zoning changes, in which I asked the authors to make sure that they were getting community input. After that, I have since, every time someone, and we have gotten thousands of comments in our office related to this, made it very clear that I oppose the current draft of the CDP and the zoning changes that are before council. We have to be very careful about how we create density in our city, and one thing that we have not done is create a comprehensive plan that not only looks at where we put density, but how are we going to support it. We can't do that without thinking about the impact of the roads, the impact of our infrastructure above ground and below ground. Those are things that have to also be considered. And I believe we have low-hanging fruit. We've talked about it today. Properties that are AHA, the properties are the City of Atlanta properties. Looking at our major corridors that can absorb the traffic, and also while we're trying to work on transit, we need to make sure that we're not disrupting our whole state of being in the City of Atlanta in order to get density. But we need to be very thoughtful about where we put it, and we need to put it in places other than disrupting single-family neighborhoods. And if the neighborhoods that are single-family are supportive of some changes, there is a process called the Neighborhood Planning Unit. Have those thoughtful discussions and come out with a resolution.
Mr. Reed, I know you've been missing the zoning conversation since you've not been mayor, so as mayor, what would you do?
I apologize. I would oppose the recommended changes to R1 that are currently being put forward. I believe that for most of us, our home is the most important asset we have. And I think that if someone wants to make a material change in your community, you ought to know about it, and it has to go through the council process. I think that there are enough changes that have already occurred to R4 and R5 that we did under my leadership, that there is a menu of opportunities available which aren't being used right now. I also think that just because of the overall environment in our city, we need to take a beat and have this conversation when things are more calm. By that I mean after we have pushed back against this tide of crime and violence, we need to have a serious zoning conversation. But I think right now we are a very fractured community. I also think that we have assets in place right now. We ought to be building at every single MARTA stop in the city of Atlanta right away. And so there are density moves that we can make right now with land that we already have or in partnerships with entities that we're strong players with to build density and go vertical with construction right away. So on the way to this facility today, we passed by the MARTA station off of Donald L. Hollowell. There's no reason in the world that that should not be an active construction site building density. Every single MARTA stop should have active construction in the city of Atlanta right away while we work out our long-term plans around zoning.
Thank you, sir. We're coming up on the fifth and last question, a little bit longer, so listen carefully. Many of you said that developing city-owned land is a major step toward meeting affordable housing goals. I think everybody's spoken to that. However, it's also been said that solving affordable housing is a lot of 2% solutions. So in my mind, that's 50 strategies that we can't get to today. It's not just one. Here's the question. And this really is, based on, I think, the philosophy of the years at the Housing Forum, as we have broadened that forum to talk about many issues. What is the responsibility of the city to coordinate efforts across public, private, and philanthropic sectors? How will you ensure there's a clear leadership and priority on affordable housing within the city? This is really about you as a leader and how you will be a collaborative leader, how you'll bring people to the table. I think we'll start with you, Mr. Dickens.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Bill, and your extended leadership since 1984 on this regional housing forum when you were just a young child. Anybody that puts an S on their chest for anything in this city is bound to fail or disappoint. You're gonna need everybody at the table. This is why I was really all in with the HouseATL movement. Why all those nonprofits, business leaders, government leaders, housing advocates, and researchers all getting together to come up with these recommendations. Now, prior to that, I had already put a lot of those people in the same room when I created the inclusionary zoning policy. It was Invest Atlanta, it's Atlanta Housing Authority, it was the law department, housing advocates, enterprise, Transformation Alliance, researchers. It is imperative that right now we get a mayor that has demonstrated the capacity to work together with all of these entities and agencies, to do it in earnest, to do it the long way, the hard way, to fight through state regulations and state policies that prohibit rent control and all these other things. We're going to have to be full throttle ahead on affordable housing, and that means utilizing relationships with the Atlanta Public Schools. I sat on a task force to find housing that are school sites that can be for affordable housing. Working with MARTA, I've actually pushed MARTA to develop on their transit-oriented development sites across all of their MARTA stations. This is about collaboration, and a lot of these things may be 2% solutions. It's a toolkit, and every tool in the toolkit is necessary. So government, business, you have to get philanthropy involved, our schools, our institutions, et cetera, and our employers to work together.
Thank you. Ms. Gay.
This is what I've done for most of my career, help bring different pieces of our city together, public sector, private sector, neighborhoods, philanthropies, to solve problems and make things happen. You asked earlier about a housing czar. I would not have a housing czar. I'm not a fan of titles without portfolio or department or resources around them. What I would do is have a housing cabinet. I would have a sub-cabinet of the mayor headed by the chief operating officer that would include the head of the Invest Atlanta, head of the Housing Authority. I would bring the school superintendent in, and I would have periodic meetings where we include the leaders of the nonprofits and philanthropic sector who are involved in housing. And we would have regular communication and develop and continue to implement the HouseATL strategy, which again, I was chaired the task force that spawned that idea. But where there's a gap now is this: nobody knows who to call at the city. Nobody knows how to get the city involved, who to call in the mayor's office, how to get the city resources. But it's not just a housing person. It's across departments. There are issues that may be in the Parks Department. There may be issues that may be in the Transportation Department. And so that's why it would be important to have this sub-cabinet that in fact can coordinate across departmental lines within the city and within the other governmental entities, but also bring in and collaborate effectively with those private and nonprofit sectors to not reinvent. We don't need to start all over. We've got a basic framework here. What we need is the city as an active participant at the table with a structure that breaks down the city silos and is clear to those outside city government as to who they call and how they get help.
Thank you very much. Ms. Moore.
Yes, the last thing we need, whether it's housing or any other issue, is another plan. What we need is execution. And what I'm going to do is have not just someone, but someone with staffing and support that can work to get the plans that have already been done, and all the conversations that have been had with our great partners out there who have been working in this space of affordable housing, and start executing those plans. I think that's what's important, is that we need to move forward with what we have done already and get those plans executed. Also, that person and their department, that person will be cabinet level, so to answer your earlier question, they will be responding to me as the mayor. And those people that are on that staff will be working hand in hand with our partners to make sure things get done. Whether it's the housing issue or any other issue, one thing that's so great about Atlanta is that we have the resources that we need to fix any issue that we have. We just need leadership that is willing to bring them to the table and then allow them to tell us what needs to happen. And we, as the city, yes, the city should be responsible for coordinating, whether it's internal issues with City Hall or external issues with City Hall, because the mayor's office, as well as the city, has a very good bully pulpit that can bring the resources and the people to the table. This is something for our people who live in this city, our residents, or our potential residents. So it is our duty and responsibility to coordinate and bring all of those people together. So as mayor, I will be making sure that we have a cabinet level position that responds to me with staff that can work with our partners who have been helping us in this space. And dust off all of these plans and get them executed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reed.
I think that every mayor will have a crisis or a challenge that they have to manage through. For Mayor Campbell, he had to execute and implement the Centennial Olympic Games. Mayor Franklin managed the water and sewer crisis, which risked a moratorium to the city masterfully. I was faced with dealing with the worst economy in 80 years, fighting through a great recession, changing the financial structure, reforming the pension system of the city. Mayor Bottoms had to deal with the COVID crisis and the pandemic and a cyber attack. I view housing as the great challenge for the next mayor. And Atlanta is actually at its very best when we have a huge challenge in front of us. So on the other side of pushing back against crime and violence, in my judgment, is a massive effort where we call all of the resources of our city together to make sure that everyone has a place in Atlanta. We were fortunate enough to have a $25 million homeless opportunity bond that leveraged another $25 million. We were fortunate enough to cut homelessness in half. We were fortunate enough to functionally end veterans homelessness. We won a $30 million Choice Neighborhood grant. We acquired the Civic Center property where construction should be going on right now. And we left $200 million in cash reserves. When the Atlanta Beltline was facing insolvency, it was my leadership and my administration that worked with Courtney English and APS to resolve that challenge. What you need right now is someone with tested leadership to take on the biggest challenge that we face right now, and that's building affordable housing.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Brown.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think one of the greatest challenges that this city faces right now with regards to housing is that we have city agencies and philanthropic partners, both in the nonprofit sector, as well as agencies across the state of Georgia that are operating in silos. And everyone is contributing to that 2% that you speak about, but we're not doing it in a collaborative way. So one of the first things I would do is rebuild the infrastructure around our city housing. And the way I would do it is I would remove the Office of Housing and Community Development from under the purview of the Department of City Planning. Right now, they report into the Commissioner, Commissioner King. I would allow that department to exist independently under its own autonomy, and I would reestablish the position of the Chief Housing Officer so that the Chief Housing Officer could operate with all of the city agencies and our philanthropic partners and work to build a master plan around affordable housing development where we can leverage our land banks, where we can leverage all of the nonprofit organizations right now working to do the same job. Because we can't say we're going to sit and build all of this housing if we don't have a comprehensive network in place that folks can trust to get the job done. And I think this is incredibly important if we're going to move Atlanta forward in truly addressing one of the most critical issues this city faces as housing.
Thank you, sir. Now, I was bragging about being on time a while ago. Now we're not. So maybe because I threw a few questions in there. We're down to the area where I'm going to kind of ask yes and no questions. A number of these I already know the answer to because you've already spoken to them, but I'm going to go through the list. You've got your card here. Put up a yes or a no, and I'm just going to ask the question and you answer. Everybody good with that? All right. Atlanta's living options are mostly large apartments, buildings, and single-family homes. There are too few duplex and quadruplex units that allow for middle market to form. The question, do you support changing the zoning ordinance to allow more density and missing middle housing? All right, we have a yes across the board. I think that's encouraging for the folks listening in. If elected mayor, would you adopt and build on the existing One Atlanta housing plan created in 2019, which aligned with HouseATL's recommendations to meet housing affordability needs? This question, would you support the One Atlanta housing plan? All right. We have a yes across the board. Will affordable housing around transit and the Beltline be a priority for you? Several of you spoke to it in your answers. All right, that's a priority. The Atlanta City Council member Westmoreland, Dickens, Brown, and 7 others introduced an ordinance to City Council on Monday to propose a general budget allocation of 2%, phased in over 3 years, for a new housing trust fund. Several of you sponsored this, so I think I know you probably support it, but let me ask, would you support this or other ideas for a dedicated source of revenue, something we've been looking for? All right, we have a no by Mr. Reed and a yes by the other candidate. Do you believe that the City of Atlanta should increase the number of permanent supportive housing units across the city? You all agree? Yes. If elected mayor, will you participate in the Atlanta Regional Commission's meeting, Metro Mayors Association, those kind of associations that have that conversation, you would participate in those? We have a yes across the board. I think that's encouraging for the region because we can't solve these things alone. Housing advocates are encouraging the execution of the second half of the $100 million bond. Are you committed to this? All right, excellent. Everybody agrees and supports that. The last one, 95% of renters have no legal representation when they are facing eviction. It's something we're right in the middle of. Landlords always do. Will you increase access to legal counsel as an effective way to increase stability for renters? All right, you all agree to that? And we thank you very much. All right, so it's time for closing remarks. I think you do this, you're going to do it 2 more times today on your closing remarks. I think what our viewers are looking for is why believe that you're going to act on any of the ideas you've shared today. Why should you be mayor and make housing a priority, which everyone has said they would? So we'll start with Mr. Reed. You're up.
When I had the pleasure of serving as the 59th mayor of the city, we took action. We came out of the worst economy in 80 years, reformed the pension system, made the city the safest that it had been in 40 years. And in the midst of a fiscal crisis, where we moved the cash reserves of the city to $200 million, we expanded AHA housing support by 25%. And when you look at the course of my administration, we took on major projects and we got them done. Whether that was figuring out how to appropriately finance the Atlanta Beltline, we got it done. Whether it was building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in partnership with the Blank Organization and the Falcons, we got it done. So again and again and again, when we have had priorities, we've delivered concrete results, cutting homelessness in half. And we will build affordable housing and get it done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reed. Yep. Brown.
First of all, Bill, thank you for this opportunity to be with you all today. I believe Atlanta is standing on the precipice of becoming this great international city we talk so much about, or becoming a city we don't recognize. The reason why I'm running for mayor is because I've opposed the establishment and the systems that have been in place that have kept our city falling behind. I believe the next mayor needs to be ready with fresh, innovative ideas to help move this city forward. As a council member, I've passed over 60 pieces of legislation, some of which to address some of our city's most complex problems. I passed legislation to disallow the congregation of poverty in low-income communities. I co-sponsored the $100 million Housing Opportunity Bond. And most recently, I worked to address living wage jobs in our city. When we begin to talk about housing, we got to make sure that our residents have the capacity to be able to afford housing in this city.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dickens.
Yes, most of you know that I've been a strong advocate on behalf of affordable housing in the city of Atlanta for the past 8 years, and that will not stop when I'm mayor of the city of Atlanta. I've worked with so many of these organizations and nonprofits and developers and landlords, et cetera, to be able to bring about policies and programs to get to this point where we have this HouseATL and One Atlanta set of recommendations. Again, we just need to implement what we've already decided is what we need to do. I've worked hard on inclusionary zoning, and now I've even issued legislation to bring it lower in AMI. I've done hundreds of senior housing rehab units to make sure that seniors stay in place and fight displacement. We have done so many things in the city of Atlanta now with affordable housing that I want to do more. We've already done a $100 million bond to a $40 million bond. I want to do a $250 million bond and have $10 million in dedicated reserve, money coming in each year in our general fund.
Thank you, sir. Yay.
Our topic today was housing, but what housing is really about is making sure all our neighborhoods are healthy and accessible. For the ones that are experiencing growth, we need to make sure they're accessible to people at all income levels, which requires a greater level of affordability. Ones that are in distress, we need to have thoughtful public investment and private investment to bring those neighborhoods forward. I can do that because I've done it. I understand how the zoning and land use codes work and what it takes to make those kinds of changes happen. I understand where the roadblocks are in the permitting process and the development process. I understand the capital stack. I understand public money. I understand private money. I understand the role of the housing authority. I know how to use these tools because I have worked with for-profit and nonprofit developers and housing authorities and local governments to actually build thousands of affordable units in and around our city and our region. And those are the skills I would bring to bear to continue to do that as mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Gay. More.
Your question is, why do people trust that we're going to do what we say we're going to do? And the issue is trust. And people who have followed city government know me. They know my record. They know I say what I mean and I do what I say. They also know that I've served with integrity for all of the years that I have been elected to serve in this office. So what you say and what you do does matter. They also know that I will be transparent with them about where we are as a city and what we plan to accomplish and how their money is being spent. That it's going to be done ethically and that I will continue to serve with integrity. But more importantly, I'm going to be held accountable, and I want people to hold me accountable for what I say that I'm going to do, what we have done in my administration, and most importantly, making sure that people get what I said I would do today and what I will say I will do as your next mayor. Thank you.
Let me thank each of you. Again, I know you have 3 of these today. You had one late last night. It really was a marathon. You know, what's clear, we all know each other, and I would say the 500 plus people that are tuning in know a lot about housing, know all of you. I think your comment about trust and can you actually do what you say, that's a key value. But each of you are leaders. One of you is going to be mayor. But each of you are leaders and are still going to be here in Atlanta. So we're going to need all of you in whatever capacity you can bring to the table. I think that's essential. We also have to always work from our assets, and we talked about many of the assets the city has and the assets that we can leverage. And we've got to collaborate. I know in the work of HouseATL and the Housing Forum and all of us who have these conversations, we can't do it without each other. So I really do appreciate that you show up at the Housing Forum, that you are working hard on this issue. I would make note that 4 years ago, when we did this very forum at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, housing had not come up at any other forum. This year, housing has come up at every forum, no matter the issue. So crime is the number one issue. It's related to housing and where people live and their availability. Public health and COVID is an issue. It involves housing. I mean, we can go right through the list. So I want to thank each of you for your leadership, for your courage to be a public servant today, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership.